All right, here we go. So the first technique I want to show you is using rubber cement. So what you want to write down in your sketchbook is rubber cement. And I want you to write down a few notes as I do this. I'm going to tell you what to do or what not to do, maybe some tips and tricks. Now you can buy something called Mascoid, which is name brand, kind of rubber cement that watercolor artists use. But you can use just good old rubber cement like this. It works just fine. One thing you should need to write down, maybe put a star or an asterisk next to it. You may not dip your brush into the rubber cement. It's a brush killer. Okay? If you get rubber cement on your paintbrush, I guess you could get out with gasoline or I don't even know. But you can use the other end of your brush. This end. So let me just grab a small brush here. There we go. So I would never use this end and get rubber cement on the bristles. That would wreck it. But I could use this end. So check it out. Let's use a blank piece of paper here. Oh, there's one. And I'm just going to open up this rubber cement. And you can use the brush that's on here if you want to do stuff like that. But I'm just going to dip my end of my brush in here. And as it'll drip off, I can make swirls or patterns or whatever I want. Just do a little something here. Now this does take a little time to dry. Another thing you can do is just go like this and use the end of it to make little dots, for example. These could be stars in a night sky. See, what happens is the rubber cement will preserve the whites underneath. So let's say you're making a starry night. You could make tons of little stars like this. Let it dry first, duh. Then you can paint the whole paper black and then let it dry. And then you can rub the rubber cement off and all those little whites have been preserved. Let me demonstrate. I've got one where I already let it dry. Now, when this dries on the end of my brush, I can later pull it right off. It's like a booger. But anyway, you'll see. It'll come right off. All right. So here's the rubber cement that's dry. I did a little drizzling and I wrote the word wow. Now I can use my watercolor. And I'm going to show you where these are at really quick. We're going to use these kind of elementary, middle school watercolors for starters. And once you graduate past the abstract painting, I will give you a nice watercolor tray with paints that come out of a tube that are even fancier, but you have to graduate. All right, so follow me with your eyes so you can see where you get this stuff. This cabinet here has all the watercolor stuff. It says watercolor paint, watercolor techniques. So these are all up here. And you might go in there and you might end up with a full one. You might go in here and find one's missing. Or one's really low, like this black one here. You can pop them out. Don't be clumsy. And you can pop them right out from behind. And you can replace them with these. This one says blue. This one's blue replacements, red replacements, and so on. So we find the black really quick. There we go. So you can just take a new black one, pop it right back in there, boom, pop it right back into there, bam, you're all set. I will be passing out brushes for you, but the other thing you need is bowls for water, which are right over here. And right in the very corner are some little palettes, so you can mix paint. So everything's kind of here and over there, and in just a little bit, I will be giving you 10 brushes. Wow. It doesn't matter if your water's cold or hot. If you're a professional artist, you might use distilled water. What? Just because you don't want any contaminants or anything. Anyway, so this is watercolor. You have to add water to it to activate it. I did have a student once that didn't realize that. I figured everyone's got their hands on these at one point, but she was from out of the country. She didn't, I don't know. She was going like this, and she said they don't work. And I said, well, just add some water to them. Check it out. So I'm going to add a little water to this. And I'll just stir it up. And check this out. I'm going to go right over the top of this. Obviously, I could take more time and care and do some beautiful painting. But what I'm trying to show you is that there's no way this paint is going to go underneath the areas where the rubber cement is. So for now, it actually looks kind of cool, but wait till it dries in 5 minutes. I'm just going to rub this off, and the whites will be perfectly preserved. So rubber cement is cool. I use it when I'm making sometimes waves, or the sun in the sky, or a little sparkle in someone's eye, and I want to preserve it. I do the whole painting. Last step, you wipe those out, boom, their eye looks like it's wet. Kind of cool. Anyway, that's rubber cement. Plastic wrap's kind of cool. I got a piece of it. That's what I'm looking for. All right, like good old Reynolds wrap, plastic wrap, handy wrap, whatever you want to call it. I learned this from my watercolor teacher in college, and I use this technique a lot. What you'd want to write down is it's good for textures. I like it for rocks, for waves. Well, I'll show you. Here's what you do. You put down some color first. All right, check this out. There's some watercolor. And watch this. I'm going to put this plastic on top. And you can bunch it and scrunch it however you want. If you do it kind of haphazard like that, when you take it off, it will look like it's rocky and kind of organic and kind of weird. Or you could go like this and stretch it this way. And you can make lots of things that look like waves, because waves are kind of usually horizontal. I better put a little more on. It doesn't work right away. You have to let this sit and dry. That's another thing you might want to note. Let it sit and dry. Maybe 5-10 minutes. And then when you pick it up, you'll see in a little bit. Then you get that effect. So I'm just going to do this one more time. Bunch it up. And we'll see what happens. And what happens is the parts that are touching the paper where there's no air underneath, the paint puddles there, but then other areas where it's raised up, like a little mountain, it's lighter. So you get these weird, interesting lights and darks. We'll take a look at the finished version in a few minutes. Wax crayon resist. So wax and water just don't mix. You can put a candle and drop it in water and pick it up, and all the water would just bead right off. It's just wax and water don't mix. So you can use that knowledge and you can draw with a crayon, like this. Ooh, you can write secret messages where no one can even read it. Now, what I want you to write down for this is press hard. If you don't press hard with the wax, this effect doesn't work very well. All right, check this out. Here comes the magic. I hope you're watching. Ooh. So people do this on Easter eggs. If you're into decorating those, you can use wax or drip wax on it. And so there you go. That's just wax resist. Now, that's kind of cool and all, but you could also do this as a texture rubbing. Check this out. I'm going to take a texture plate. This used to be on one of the lights up there, and it fell down, and it broke, and the guy was throwing it away, and I said, no, texture. He looked at me funny. All right. But you can put texture underneath here, and you can do a texture rubbing. It could be in white, or you can even do it with any color. But you can pick up a texture and bring those into your painting. Now, I just did it really, haphazard. I didn't really care much about where I did this. But you could, for example, maybe you've drawn a square. You could do a rubbing right inside that square and then bring up a texture. So hopefully you can see all those little dots are now, they look like white. It's kind of cool. Anyway, so that's just wax, crayon in combination with the texture plate. I've got hundreds of different types of textures. Might be something you want to try. All right. Toothbrush spritzing. What the heck's that all about? Well, I'm going to give you a set of 10 brushes, and one of them is a toothbrush. Don't be grossed out. These are not my old toothbrushes. We had a dentist once donate like 200 toothbrushes just because they changed styles or something. So these have only been used for painting, unless some weirdo brushed their teeth with them. That'd be gross. All right. The tip for this is to pull toward yourself. Pull up like this. I can do it one-handed. I put it down and I pull up. What that does is that flexes the bristles this way. Oh, it's going to drip. All right, watch this. And then it flings the paint the other way. So watch from the side. This is spritzing. Okay, it's kind of like airbrushing, spray paint. Kind of a cool technique. You can get really fine ones, really thick ones at first. Now, every once in a while I get someone that goes like this and they pull down and all of a sudden they look like a Dalmatian. Don't do that. Make sure you are pulling down so that they flick the opposite way. So that's called spritzing. Now, here's where it gets exciting. Oh, this one already said with a stencil. All right, so we're going to do this one with a stencil. Here's what I mean. Ooh, you guys gonna love this. Grab some scissors here. I had some scissors. I misplaced them. Ah, here. All right. You can make a stencil like this. And now I will use this with my toothbrush technique. And let's pick up a little bit of paint here. I'm just putting my toothbrush right in here. All right, check this out. And then you lift this up, and boom. You've got a stencil with spritzing. So it's kind of hard to control, but you can control it with something like this. Or, this is the negative. I could use the positive. Ooh, let's try that. Let's try a different color. Let's get fancy here. Let's try red. Oh, I got a little purple in there, so we're going to have some magenta. All right. Oh, that's called dripping. I should have been more careful. All right, here we go. Let's try that again. There we go. Ooh, I like how it curls up, so I can pick it up. Anyway, you can do some fun stuff with stencils and spritzing. You could even use this in combination with tape. Tape off some areas and spritz, and then lift the tape. Yeah, it's kind of cool, I think. All right. Moving on to the next one. Salt. Salt, write down salt, but write down use good paper. I'm going to give all of you actually some thick watercolor paper because these techniques I'm using like typing paper, and it's not going to be super effective. I'll try it. I'll try it on the good paper here. Also write down, it works best on darker colors. So it's not really going to show up on yellow, maybe orange if it were really dark or something. And the last thing I'd ask you to write down is, just in case if you ever want to do this on your own, kosher salt is the best. Which I just put over here somewhere. Here it is. Yeah, Kosher. Or it doesn't even have to be kosher, but rock salt, thick salt, big pieces of salt. When it's that really fine, cheap salt, it doesn't work as well. So I'm just going to put down some color. Again, darker is better. Put a little more over here. And here's some good kosher salt. Unlike this is the cheap, really fine. I'll show you both. What the heck? Now you don't want to just pour it on. Unless you're doing a beach scene. Sometimes I do. I'll put a bunch down and I'll just dump it. So there's a few pieces of fine salt. But the rock salt, this is thicker, more coarse. Let's see what this does. Now, you're not going to see it right away. We just have to let it do its thing. So again, you might want to make a note. You have to wait. There's a waiting period. But what happens is, maybe we can kind of start to see this. All those little granules of salt, you can start to see it happening here. They'll soak up like little sponges, the surrounding paint. And then later, once this is dry, you brush all the salt off. We're not trying to get a texture. We just want the effect. So you rub all the salt off once it's dry, and it should make little, almost looks like little stars. The salt soaks it up. Well, you'll see. I'll show you some examples in just a few minutes. But that's salt. Drawing with water, there's a few ways to do this. One thing you can do is you can use a pipette, which is this, basically, like a little, pipette, I don't know, syringe kind of thing. You can squeeze it and check this out. I do need clean water, so make a note. You need clean water if you're going to try this technique. And we just got a few more, and you guys can try some of these. All right. So I know you can actually buy water reservoirs that you can really control better than this, but for our purposes, this will be fine. So, check it out. I'm just going to write Mr. L. All right. Then, check this out. Use a dark color, mix up a bunch of paint, and then you can just touch, and it should fill the whole thing. Isn't that cool? Boom. And it just fills it. Now, you need to let it sit flat for a while so that can dry. Okay? It's a really cool effect. It kind of just has that liquid, watery kind of feel about it. But as soon as I go like this, if I were to pick up my paint and go, hey, check this out, then it's dripping all over. So you don't want to do that. All right. Another thing you can do, which I have bought, and I've got plenty of these, is use a water brush. Here it is. These come in all different types. Like there's some that are flat on the top, some that are round, some that are like calligraphic that have angles so you can write like calligraphy. Anyway, this has water in it. I filled this up a little bit ago. Put the water in here, and then we screw the top on. And then you can do kind of the same thing. You can draw with this. Well, let me squeeze a little bit. There we go. All right, so you can draw and squeeze with this and basically do the same thing. It's great for blending and stuff too. So it's just a brush with water. So feel free to try those out. Same idea. You touch and the stuff can just move on its own. Not as effective as the last one. Really, those brushes are more for blending. Let's talk about lifting for a second. Try lifting on your good paper. Okay? So I've got a piece of good paper here, and I've put down some watercolor. I'm getting my brush really clean, squeezing out the excess water. Get this really clean. All right, check this out. If you make a mistake, you can lift the paint right off the paper. Not on typing paper. But usually if I have a mistake, I'll get it wet and I'll just let it sit there for a minute, and it reactivates all the pigment underneath. And then sometimes I'll go like this and I'll just scrub a little bit to loosen it up. And then, if you've got a paper towel or substitute, you can just blot it right up and you can erase. Now, it might stain a little bit. Let me try to erase more here. Also, you can scrub too much. If you keep scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing, you're going to start to tear up your paper, and you're going to start to eat at the paper, and that's the pulp of the paper. Paper is made from a bunch of little pieces of fiber, little plant material and cotton and trees and sticks and stuff. It's all churned up. So you can see I got most of it up. It's a little bit more stained than this. So you can scrub a little bit more. Again, use a clean brush. Let the water just sit there for a while. Let it loosen it up. Scrub lightly. And then blot. And you can pick up that pigment. And you can get it pretty close back to where you were. Again, this will not work on your typing paper, so try that on the good piece I give you. But I think it's important you know that you can erase this stuff. All right, just a few more, and then we're done, and you guys can try blowing with a straw. Pretty straightforward. I have straws here, one for each of you. Please don't share, that's gross. And don't throw it away, just put it in your bin in case you want to try this technique for the next couple weeks. So let's just put some down here. Just going to put down a little bit of color. Great way to create movement. And these are bendy straws, so you can control it. Yeah, you can totally make it look like a tree, which is great. You know, you can use it to make letters look like they're dripping or rain going down a window. I mean, all kinds of things. So just know that that's an option, but hold on to your straw. Next is sponge. I've got a ton of like real sponges. So these aren't like, you know, store-bought square rectangle sponges. The real sponges from the bottom of the sea, for example. This one's called an elephant ear sponge. Woo. And it's got different textures on each side. One side is going to give you something like this, where this other side might look more like more hairy on top. So what you do is mix up some paint in your palette. By the way, this side of your tray is also a palette. You probably didn't know that. You thought it was just the lid, but it actually has different compartments so that you can mix paint. But again, feel free to use your large palette, this one here for mixing too. So you can mix a bunch of paint in there. And back in the 90s, man, this was a big deal. People would come to your house and do faux finishing on your walls with sponges. It was all the rage. But you can use sponging to create all kinds of organic effects, to make bushes and trees really quick and easy. If you're trying to make something organic, you start with something organic. Usually turns out pretty good. We've got a few pieces left. All right. Splatter painting, I know it seems really easy. You just get a bunch of paint, and then you fling it. Yeah, that's essentially it. But I find you guys get carried away, and you start going like this, like, wow! And then all of a sudden it's over there, and on your face, and on your friend, and on their shirt. So, another way to do this. Take any other object, pair of scissors, a pencil, whatever, get a lot of paint on here, and you can tap and control those splatters a bit better. If you want a big action pose kind of splatter, go over there where no one's around, and you can try to get some that have more movement visually. I'm cool with that, but I see it every year. Someone's like, that's my new shirt. Not my problem. All right. Scratching. The Italian name is sgraffito. But check this out. You take some paint. You put it down. And you can use just the back of your paintbrush to go like this. Just wrote the word scratch. And what I did was I kind of embossed the paper. I made little valleys. And it's just going to sit there. It's going to be darker in those areas. So you're probably not going to write the word scratch, but you might be painting and you want to add a few branches or some grass or whatever. You can totally just let the paint puddle in a certain area just by, ooh, a little too hard there. So anyway, that's just a cool, quick technique you might try. Dry brush is another. You can literally use a dry brush. Like, check this out. I'm hardly going to put any paint in this. Just a little bit. There we go. Nice and dry. So now I can draw with a dry brush. Let's make this look like a tree. It can look just like bark. I could put some grass down here. So it's just using a brush that isn't loaded. Okay, a loaded brush does one thing, a dry brush can actually be a technique. So, and I think we're down to the last one. Wet on wet. This would be good on your good paper. So make a note. Use this on the good paper. I'll try it on here. No, heck, I'll use the good paper. Check this out. So what you do is, well, there's a couple ways to do this. Number one, you can just put down some water first, like this. And then you can mix up some pigment, and you can just touch an area, and it's going to bleed. Let's zoom in here. There we go. Let's do that a little bit darker. Boom. These are called blooms. They actually just bloom. They bleed. You can add another color inside. You can keep going. But this is called wet in wet. The paint is taking over and doing all kinds of crazy stuff on its own. And this is great for clouds. This is great for kind of wispy, atmospheric things. It can just be fun. So experiment, but use the good paper. All right, let's just revisit a couple like this one with the rubber cement. Should be dry by now. Check this out. This just rubs right off with the finger. If it starts to irritate your finger, use an eraser and it'll come right off. Other things you should know, you can draw with pencil first, totally watercolor your entire painting, and then erase the pencil out, and the paint stays. So that's kind of cool. Let's see what the salt did. Find that real quick. Oh, plastic wrap. It made some effect, but I think I was torturing it a bit much. You know what I'd like to do is just show you like a finished version of everything, and then you guys can check this out. All right. Lifting. I've lifted on this so many times, and on this good watercolor paper, you can get it back to white. Here we have, let's zoom out here. Here we have what happens with wax, crayon resist. Mascoid is like that rubber cement. Also tape. Right next to rubber cement, right down you can use tape too. Here you can see the scratching or sgraffito. You could use anything. You could use a fingernail to scratch. Here's that wet and wet technique. Notice how that looks like clouds? Here's what I did when I blew with the straw once. Totally made myself what looks like a cherry tree. Here's that dry brush technique, a little more pronounced. Splattering. Sponging. I added like 3 layers here to make that look like a 3D brush. Alcohol. I'm not getting any out, but you should maybe write that down. If you're at home and you have some rubbing alcohol, you can do little blooms and it actually moves the paint. Here's what it looks like with salt. Not the best. I have better examples. I'll show you another. But it creates a texture. And here is what plastic wrap does. It creates dark areas and light areas. And there's a value scale. So there's actually more. There's bubbles, which I'm not very successful with. But you can mix up some soap with water. And I do about half and half. Use your straw and blow bubbles. Then you have to scoop the bubbles onto your watercolor paper, let them sit. And if they sit there long enough, once they all pop, it looks like there's bubbles on your page. But I have mixed success with that. So, I just enough time to get this going. All right, all the supplies are out here. I'm going to put this stuff on the board, pass out brushes to you. And can I actually get some passers? Maybe someone help me pass these out? Yeah, awesome. Give everyone one good piece. I can tape or staple this into your sketchbook eventually. I'm going to give each of you 10 brushes. When we are done with this semester, you need to give me back 10 brushes. Part of your grade is how well those brushes come back to me. You're welcome to. Totally, yeah. We're going to start with cheap watercolor and then get into a better watercolor. Yeah, you have your own stuff. That's cool. Totally. I tell you what though, these are like brand new, most of these. Oh no! Just spilled water everywhere. Not quite yet. That's a little bit.
Okay, I'm kind of. Wait, are we doing this paper? Or we just like this? I feel like this one is these
Most of them are. There you go. Oh boy. I would start with those techniques that need to wait a while, like rubber cement or lifting or salt, plastic wrap. Yes. Yes.